Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Dan, and this is Forlorn Hobbies. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be asking, why do I play Black Powder? To create a kind of discussion about the strengths and weaknesses, as well as giving a general overview of the game itself, and why Black Powder is my game of choice as opposed to any number of a huge variety of the other games that are available. Now, to start with, why do I play Black Powder? Well, Tim makes me. Thanks for listening, guys. Joking aside, I think Black Powder is a very good entry point for historical gaming because it's well supported by Warlord Games and it has a very relaxed structure to the game. Now, I don't personally believe that it is a competitive rule set. It's a rule set that allows you to recreate historical games and have a good kind of balanced approach to it. Now, the rules themselves are very good at being house ruled because they're quite open-ended and it allows the game to kind of flow without the constant need of having to check references and all these little rules like what does this weapon do, what kind of armor is this. It's just a very basic stat line. The more depth you add comes from the supplements to give each era a specific flavour, and it can be used right from kind of the Marlborough Wars and right up until until early World War One, before the introduction of tank warfare. But what makes Black Powder stand out to the different editions, such as General d'Armée, Blucher, Valour and Fortitude, Soldiers of Napoleon? Well, I think it's just personal preference. However, I've limited experience in many of the other games, but the one thing that sells Black Powder to me above anything else is the fact that you have a very similar rules system available from the era of biblical wargaming all the way up to kind of modern, in the sense that Hail Caesar and Pike and Shot by Warlord Games as well are based around a similar sort of mechanic. So you can pretty much pick up any collection and think that you know roughly what rules and the basics of rules are quite similar across all three gaming systems. You can build your armies in the same way. You can buy those 40 square bases and know that it's going to suit you all the way from your antiquity all the way to kind of colonial warfare, and have a very similar kind of approach to your gaming structure organization. Now, if you want variety, then by all means play different games. I play many systems, but I think Black Powder is a very central kind of system, and if you base things for Black Powder, you can then use that same stuff to play other games, as opposed to building it for a specific, more kind of niche game, and then not being able to transfer that collection across to other systems. Black Powder is a very large scale game. You require quite a large board to play on it. Now, it can be adapted down to smaller board sizes, like the more traditional 6x4. However, this will require some kind of tinkering with the movement stats and ranges in particular. I think Tim's done an excellent job in reducing all ranges and measurements by a third for his event under Eagles to Glory, where unfortunately, due to limitations of venue size, they're on 8x4 boards this year, which I think the width will be much better and change the dynamics of the game. But the 6x4 last year's worked well, but it did become a little bit clustered, especially when you're taking a British army and you've got everyone in line. You could quite easily fill the board with quite a few miniatures. Yeah. But realistically, Black Powder is designed to be played on an 8x6 board, I think, minimum, just to give you that grander scale with a couple of brigades of infantry and a brigade or two of cavalry as well to get the fullest experience of the rule set. Now, the game itself follows a simple move, shoot, and attack mechanic, which is very quick and easy to remember. You literally need two sides of A4 with your references to play the game. Now, this game can be as complex as you wish to make it, but in the movement phase, for example, you will pick your battalion, your unit, even your brigade, depending on what you're playing, issue your 3 or up to 3 orders, whether that's move, charge, form square, change formation, and then you will take a simple test based on the brigade commander's strategy rating. You will either pass it by getting equal to or under, or fail it. If you get so many steps below, you get an extra movement, and so on. Now, if you do the Tim special and roll a double 6, you'll be blundering, which adds a great bit of flavour to the risk element of the game. Issuing the orders themselves, you want to be specific, because if you say, I want this battalion of line to move, if you roll a double 1, for example, you will move the full 3 distances across the table. So it's very kind of carefully worded, makes the game a much better experience for you. So it would be, I want this battalion of line to advance up to this hedgerow, for example, and that hedgerow being a move and a half away. So even if you roll the full 3 moves, they would stop where you want them to stop. Now, shooting, again, is very simple. Each unit has a weapon profile, a range, amount of shooting dice. There are some slight modifications, but generally it's you're hitting on 4s, going up to 5s for cover, for example, down to 3s for close range, and you roll a couple of dice, and then your opponent takes their morale save before working out casualties. Combat works pretty similarly in the sense that the enemy gets to have a closing fire, which is just a shooting attack, and then any combat will be resolved, both players hand to hand get to attack, take saves, resolve to see who wins combat, which is fairly straightforward. It's done on casualties and supports, and it's very simple and easy to follow with the basic game mechanics. The units themselves do not lose models as they go along, so it enables you to have more models on a base. You don't have to sort out multi-basing and just having to swap in and out bases of 2, bases of 4. They record stamina, so most units have an average of 3, and then once that gets to 0, they don't die or run away. They just take excess casualties, which are removed on a turn-by-turn, well, even phase-by-phase basis, where they'll take a test on the break test chart, and they'll subtract any excess casualties. And if they roll a 4 or less, or result in a 4 or less, then they will explode and be taken off the table. Anything else, then they kind of stick around. They're slightly more worn. They're shaken, so they suffer minuses to their shooting and to their melee, but it allows for a more realistic approach to gaming. However, it can become a little bit congested when you have so many shaken units, where it would actually just be easier for your movement to get fresh troops in than them just being removed. what gives Black Powder its gaming flavour, should we say, is the implementation of special rules and supplements. It's quite well supported in terms of a variety of eras. However, as always, there are areas in history that scream out for a supplement. Now, the Napoleonic Wars is obviously a big thing for Black Powder, so they have three current supplement books, being the Peninsula Campaign, the Hundred Days Campaign, and the Clash of Eagles for 1812, and the Napoleon's invasion of Russia, essentially. Now, there are countless books that you could have for that era alone, such as Leipzig, 1806, 1805, 1809, even going back to the Revolutionary Wars as well, or Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. So we can live and dream that one day we'll get at least some of those, especially seeing as Warlord keep teasing us with a Leipzig book, but never mention any progression. But it also covers a wider range from colonial wars. You've got the Mahdist uprising, I think it's Blood on the Nile, and you also have the Zulu Wars book as well. For other Black Powder eras, you've got the American Civil War, which is probably quite big across the pond in the US. So it gives a good variety, but again, it screams for more coverage. Now, the range is available, so Crimea, I think there's a Crimea book in the works, so that would be good. And then places like India could do with a good Black Powder book. The Perrys have done the Triple Alliance model range, so rules for that would be interesting as well. And I think the Franco-Prussian War could do with a great supplement book, although Warlord don't produce the figures for the last two, so they're less likely to do the rules for them. And I believe that the Perry's rule set, I want to say Valor and Fortitude, has just released stats for these eras, including the Carlist War. But talking about the lack of supplements being covered, the moves on to the kind of what makes Black Powder a good game is that the stat lines are pretty generic for different eras. So a man with a musket will have a pretty similar stat line from the Wars of the Spanish Succession all the way up to the colonial era, because it's, and with a few different special rules to represent their kind of more unique flavour as a nationality, as a unit. So even though a British line infantryman and a French line infantryman will have the same stats, then the special rules that they have, such as first fire for the British or pass the charge for the French, offer a surprisingly distinct appearance and difference in their gameplay. It encourages players to play a certain way with a certain faction, depending on the era. So the British armies will always excel defensively, whereas French, you want to be aggressive. Now, we do try this on Tim's channel at Napoleonic Wargaming, and I think we can safely say that the French are cursed, regardless of how aggressive we play with them. But generally speaking, the French want to be mobile. They've got high strategy ratings. They've got the pass to charge. They've got an increased morale save when they're in the pass to charge, and they want to be charging and punching through the centre or rolling up the flank of their opponent, whereas the British just want to sit down, dig deep, and form their lines and overwhelm their opponent from a defensive position with increased firepower. Now, each nation, even just taking the Clash of Eagles book as a standalone example, there are quite a few nations represented in that book, and all of them have a distinct characteristic. There's the difference between the Austrians and the Russians, for example, is quite a wide gulf that enables different playstyles on the tabletop. The Russians are represented with their kind of fiery determination and represent both the extra stamina and the benefits to charging, whereas the Austrians have their large, bulky masses and are very unwieldy, and that's represented in the rules for them, such as the issuing of orders, which, all these little things add together to make a unique experience for that faction, even though on paper they look very similar. One thing that I find that Hail Caesar in particular does really well is that they have a compilation of all the different factions in one book with their stats and their points and their special rules. Now, it obviously doesn't go into huge depth about them, but it does provide the, the necessary things that you need to be able to use them on the tabletop. So something like this would be a great thing for Warlord to implement into Black Powder and Pike and Shot as well, because it gives that more inclusive feeling and support where a supplement might not necessarily make them huge amounts of money in a very niche area. With the downside of some eras not being covered by a supplement, the point system provided in the back of the Black Powder rulebook offers a good opportunity to kind of create your own based on the eras that you are interested in, because you can see from the supplements that you have available that kind of the distinctions between specific nations. They offer kind of tribal elements later on with the Zulus, so you can kind of look at each of them and come up with your own kind of mini kind of rule set or kind of fan made supplement to cover it. I know that Richie Hall has done a fantastic job for his Boer War scenarios, and having played a couple, I think they're very easy to convert the stats to the era that you want because they're so generic, and it's the special rules that give the flavour. So you could go, right, I want to create the Haitian uprising, and you could quite easily look at Spanish guerrillas in the rule set, take their rules, tweak it a couple, maybe add or remove a set of a tweak a stat here or there, add a special rule here or there, such as making them bloodthirsty. I think guerrillas already have bloodthirsty, or making mixed arms, better hand to hand, unit sizes. Just tweak it, and it's very easy to kind of replicate and create something to fill the gap that you want to fill. So what kind of forces suit Black Powder? Now, I think Black Powder is really good at just picking a historical Orbat and being able to replicate it on the tabletop. As I've said, I don't think it's an overly competitive game, because even though it has point systems and a combat an engagement using points works flawlessly, I think its main strength is just providing you with a rule set to recreate a historical battle or engagement, and it can be used amongst many players to represent either side as well, Like, we often play quite big games with 3 or 4 people aside, and it flows wonderfully because it's simple that even though that people that play it very rarely they can just pick it up and run with it, as opposed to having to go, oh, what does this do? What does that do? Now, as I've mentioned earlier, I think a couple of brigades minimum is where you get the foundation of the game from. So if you've got 4 units, yes, you can play Black Powder, but you're not really going to get all the elements of the games, and you're not really going to see the flavour of that rule system come through with the supplements. It's when you're clashing on a divisional level, kind of upwards, that it really comes into its own, I think. Now, there's a huge controversial debate between points and Orats, and as I've said previously in other videos, I think that there is a place for both. This rule set enhances both and allows you to have the opportunity for both. But historically, most engagements were not even, which is why the argument for points is kind of criticised, because it balances the initial forces, whereas if you look at the game mechanics themselves, it balances towards the not necessarily the historical result of the engagement, but it kind of compensates for the underdog as well. So, if it was the reality of points in the historical game would have probably been like 1,000 points on one side, 600 points on the other side. But the way that the game plays out, the risk elements in it with the orders and the limitations of the nations and their special rules, it kind of overall balances out the game to a fun, enjoyable experience, as opposed to the head crunching kind of competitiveness that you'd get with games such as 40k, for example, where the primary focus is to win at all costs, whereas the historical gaming is much more, I want to have a what if scenario. These are the rules that I'm going to use to assist me in seeing what could have happened differently. So whilst I think that Black Powder in itself is a great game, there are some flaws and drawbacks to it that I think could do with being changed. The first and foremost for me is I think cavalry is very one-dimensional. Now, once you've got the hang of the game, you either just sit there and use your cavalry to force infantry into square to reduce their firepower, or you throw it away as a glass cannon against the other person's cavalry. Now, I think I wouldn't necessarily know how to change the rules and the suggestions to make cavalry much more realistic without making them too overpowered. But I think that's one of the few drawbacks for me, is the use of cavalry. I would like to see a little bit more character for them. Artillery as well. I think artillery does a good job, but I would like to see an artillery phase, because many battles opened with artillery salvos. So I just think to enhance that character a bit more, then potentially the phase order should be artillery, move, shooting, and then melee, or even just swap shooting and movement around. And then, but that's it really. There's a few minor niggles that I have as well, such as the broken brigades where the brigade is removed once it is broken or reduced to half strength, which can take out quite a lot of the chunk of your force, if especially seen as it's quite easy to shake a unit or in Black Powder because they only have a low level of stamina. And the interpenetration rules as well, the fact that you can just move freely through your own units, I just don't think adds that kind of historical realism to it. Now, from a game sense, it's practical and easy, but I find it quite often removes that tactical element. But in contrast, this is where I think Black Powder is written in such a great way, is that it makes it very easy to bring in house rules. So myself and Tim, when we play, we obviously don't allow interpenetration of units, and we uh, slightly tweak the Broken Brigade rules so that they just can't advance and they have to fall back until they're rallied, and they're only destroyed when the unit itself is removed. So if they're shaken, they can still rally. They're not removed, which I think adds a much more inclusive and realistic approach to the game, because the other units in your brigade wouldn't just run away. They would still determinedly stand their ground. They might not push forwards with the strength, but they would stick around and kind of hold their ground, allowing you to fall back in good order. They're not just going to rout because they've lost half the brigade. They might be very unnerved, but they're still disciplined soldiers at the end of the day. Now, house ruling is a whole quagmire in itself, really, but it really enables you to just tweak the game to how you prefer to play with your friends. And as I said, it gives you that kind of beer and pretzels approach, kind of it's there for your enjoyment rather than head scratching analysis of all the kind of different rules. It's just, this is how I can have a couple of beers, have a couple of snacks, and play a fun recreation of a game with like-minded people, and that to get a kind of what-if result, as opposed to I'm going to crush my opponent. Now, from Tim's battle reports, you can often see his saltiness. I can assure you that I enjoy playing Tim all the time, and we have a great laugh about it. His dice are just atrocious, and being a sensitive soul, they do get to him from time to time. Well, I will first of all congratulate you for sticking around this far. Um, but that's really my thoughts on Black Powder. Now, as I say, it's my predominant game for historicals in this era, but I'm not averse to playing other games, so maybe in the future I'll do reviews of the other available game systems, but once my knowledge of them is more um, deepened, so that I can offer an honest review rather than assumptions. Now, Black Powder in itself is relevant because obviously we have our Under Eagles to Glory 2, the re-glorying or re-eagling, whatever Tim's called it, series on my progress with the Russian army. So there will be kind of references to it throughout kind of that series and other collections in the future. I'm also probably going to do a how to play series as well. I know some people have asked for that because they haven't really found it on the internet, but I think I'm going to talk to Tim and try and come up with something that we can do together about that, because he has a much bigger following than I do, and I think it would be more beneficial for something for him to do as opposed to me. But I will obviously have little things here and there about it as well. And I am away for a few weeks, so there will be a couple of quick and easy painting videos coming out in the next couple of weeks in the meantime whilst I'm away. It's also Halloween, so we're going to have a Halloween themed one, and then I think we are going to be taking a trip across the pond and doing some brave Confederates for the American Civil War, but I will explain more about that in a future video. Now, I hope you've enjoyed it. You're certainly mad enough to have stuck around till this point, so I will hopefully see you next time. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, enjoy your hobby.